Welcome, friends, and thank you for joining me for tonight's live stream. Now, my name is Mark, and of course, if you're a fan of GambettiCon or a regular attendee of GambettiCon, you will know me as Mark Allard-Will, comic book writer. Now, you may have noticed, if you're a fan of mine or a follower of mine, that over the past 2.5, 3 years, I've been in a trajectory of a journey in photography, both film and digital, largely on film. And it is that journey that brings us here tonight. Of course, we're doing this off the back of a very successful live stream that we did, let's say 2 weeks ago now, and that was called Photography Simulator Live. Now, in that we showed you a Lush Foil photography sim, which teaches you how to properly expose a photograph in camera. But that's only one half of the equation. How do you expose a shot in camera? That gets you half of the way there. You may need to do photo editing. And it's tonight's live stream that we aim to teach you some of the photography editing basics. So we'll get into that in just a second here. But if Anisha's watching, thank you so much for being my co-host, if you will, on the Photography Simulator Live. Really appreciate that. So I hope you are watching, and big shout out to you there. You did a great job there. And thank you to anybody who watched that. Now, my journey continuing in photography isn't going to take away from comics. I am working on my next graphic novel as we speak, so don't worry, comic book fans, I will be back with another comic book. But I am going to keep doing that journey with photography too. And if you are coming to this year's GambettiCon, then you will see me bring some enlargements, some framed pieces, and maybe even some gallery-wrapped canvases to the show, as well as my comic books and graphic novels. So without further ado, let's take a look at the agenda for tonight's workshop. So we're going to be looking at dodging and burning, we're going to be looking at cropping, and we're going to be looking at color correction. Now, I'm not going to teach you everything tonight. I'm just going to teach you some of the things that are going to get you close to being able to perfect a photo. So let's pretend that you watched the Photography Simulator Live and you took some learnings away from that, or you came to my quite successful film photography workshop at last year's Gambetti. So that would have been GambettiCon 2024, and thank you to everyone who attended that. You may have gone away with some knowledge of how to get very close to getting a shot perfect in camera. But let's say that it's not quite there. You've got to do some editing to perfect it. And that's what tonight's workshop is going to focus on. But we're going to take you from step 1 to step 2, from A to Z, A to B, however you want to phrase that. So don't worry, we won't throw you in at the deep end here. So dodging and burning, we'll quickly summarize what that is. So burning is to allow more light onto a printed image. This harkens back to the days of enlargers. So when I'm talking about enlargers, you shoot on film back in the day, or on plates, photographic plates. So we're talking way before digital cameras. And what would happen is you would have two artists in the photography world. You would have the darkroom artist and you would have the photographer themselves. That may be the same person. You may have a photographer who has a studio and is really trained up in a darkroom, or you may have a creative team where your photographer works with a darkroom pro, and they work together on how to perfect an image. So how would this work? If my image is too light, I need certain areas burnt in. That's what burning would do. I'd let more light in. So that literally would have been a piece of cardboard that I would have held underneath the enlarger. So an enlarger, you take that negative, put it under a magnifier, and you extend it away from your print, what is going to be your photographic photographic paper that you burn the image into to create your print. I would stop the light from hitting most of the area that I don't want it to hit, and we'll cover what that means in a minute. I'd have a hole in it, and that hole lets more light through, and I can guide that onto the area that I want to do. However, that is now done digitally with a tool in Photoshop or Lightroom or On1 or whatever photo editor you use. Dodging, however, is the opposite. I would have a cardboard tool if I was under the enlarger, and this would kind of look like a lollipop, and I would wand that over areas where I don't want light to hit. So that would make certain areas lighter if I got too many shadows in my photo. Cropping should be fairly obvious to you. That is removing unnecessary image. And then color correction is if my colors are off, then I can go back and look at that. When we talk about that darkroom pro, that darkroom artist that used to exist, I've put a link in the description of today's video that links to a really wonderful YouTube channel called Shoot Film Like a Boss. That is done by Roger Lowe, who is a photographer out of the United Kingdom, the UK. And he is one of those darkroom artists. He taught himself how to be a darkroom artist. And the video that I've linked to in the description is a video where he teaches you what all of that means with the dodging and burning and the cropping, but what it means to an enlarger. So if I feel it's really important for you to go away and learn the history and the science of what you're doing in photography, because that is the, let's say, the groundwork from which you can learn to be a better photographer, because you understand, if you understand why the processes exist, you understand how to do the processes, and then you can perfect the processes. That's my, my way of viewing that personally. So we've taken a look at that, what today's agenda is. So we're going to start with dodging and burning. So we're going to drop into Photoshop here. And what I have here is a shot that has the CN Tower in Toronto. I also have the Canada Life building in front of it there. But the light is very flat, as you can see on here. So what I've done in camera, my camera has an EV meter, which is an even grey meter. That is a meter where we're aiming to hit the 0. So you've got a chart where in the middle you have a 0, you have plus 0.5, plus 1, plus 1.5, so on and so on, up to plus 3, and then you have the same down to minus 3. You want to land in the middle because that means an even exposure. I did spot metering, and I spot metered on the CN Tower and then on the sky. That may have been a little bit of a mistake. I should have actually metered on the Canada Life building, then the CN, and then gone somewhere in between for the settings that I was using, and kind of go in an even middle ground to get a more even exposure. So we're going to look at, like I say, dodging and burning. So I've got my dodge tool here, sorry, burn tool here. I believe that's a burn tool. Yep, burn tool. I want to make this huge. So I'm going to increase the radius. I'm going to get it up to something like this. And I'll tell you why as we go here. And the reason for this is storytelling, visual storytelling. What I want to impart on you with photography and with photo editing is that you're not just trying to create the perfect image or a great image, you're trying to tell a story. The reason I want this so big, this burn tool, you can see that's very huge. And you can see that's a circle like it literally would be a hole in a piece of card. So it really does harken back to those darkroom days. Now, the reason I want it so big is I want a halo effect around this building. I want to create something, for lack of a better word, godly. I want this to be dramatic around the Canada Life building and to some extent the CN Tower. But I do also want to burn in the CN Tower a little bit because that is a little bit too white for my liking. So yeah, I really want something dramatic, a punch of this very ethereal white around the building. So let's begin. So this is literally a case of you wand it around where you need it to be, and you hold and left click. And I should clarify that tonight I'm working in Photoshop. Now that does mean that with this being a digital photo, this is one of the rare times I didn't shoot on film. You would scan a piece of film, a negative, and you would bring it into somewhere like Photoshop anyway if you needed to do some editing. But that does mean with this being a digital photo, I'm not working with a RAW file. We are not going to cover RAW and RAW photography tonight because that is a thing that we could spend a whole evening doing that and not even touch the surface. So what I do, left click and hold to begin burning. And I'm just trying to burn this sky area in. And it's going to take quite a few passes here. But you'll see that it's already beginning to drag out the blue. I'm going to go up there, and I'm going to leave that area of the building, come down this side, burn in the CN tower. I might only leave it like that for the CN tower. Come up again and really burn this area in. And really not get too close to the building at all. You might begin to see the effect I'm going for here. And I would kind of want to leave it there so you can see that dramatic halo effect around the building. But we did also speak about dodging. So what am I going to do with dodging here? Well, dodging, like I say, is to bring more light in. That's to avoid, again, if we were under the enlarger, that's to avoid the light that I'm burning into my photographic film hitting, photographic paper, I keep saying that. So again, the dodge tool here actually looks like a lollipop, again, harkening back to the actual dodge tool. So it's going to be lollipop shaped again, but I'm going to want to reduce this a bit. No, that's too small. So we're beginning to get into our storytelling here of how we use an image for storytelling. Oh, let's say 900 on that and enter. Yeah, that should do. So let me illustrate to you what I want to do here. I can see the light, the sunlight hitting the CN tower on what would essentially be this flank of the building. I want to bring out highlights on this side of the kind of the life building. I don't believe the light was actually hitting here, but I want to tell that story regardless. So again, it's just your left click and hold over here, and I want to be really careful not to hit that left edge. I just want to hit this front edge. I'm going to need to do at least a couple of passes here, because we really want to bring this out. I'm going to have to go into a smaller setting in a second here. That's beginning to look fairly good. I might actually leave it there. Let's see what another pass looks like. And then I don't think I'm going to do that lower front, but I will do this area. All right. So we're beginning to get a nice image here where I've brought out highlights on this building that were missing when I took the photo. So this is what I'm talking about. You're taking that image that you had that was nearly there and taking it there. So now I just want to get this lower flank here without hitting too much else. So this should do it. All right, there we go. That's where I would realistically leave that image. I know that doesn't seem like much at all, but you will hear a lot of people saying that they would only ever edit on RAW and pull images out on RAW, but this is a showcase to you that you can actually edit JPEG and get an image that is completely usable. I might actually bring out some more of the blue on this side. And yeah, that's what I would call a done image. I've got that really nice dramatic halo effect around the building, and that really brings the eye into the middle, and that's really helping to tell that story. The CN tower now looks a bit more dark and dramatic, and I've got those dramatic highlights on that front face of the Canada Life building. That's realistically where I would leave that. So that's really as simple as dodging and burning can be. But again, you have to know your situations for this and be able to have some idea of how to read light. Again, I'm reading that's the sunlight is hitting the front of that CN tower, which is why I went for the front of this building here and didn't go for anything else. So now let's look at cropping. This was a small foray into street photography that I did during my time in Toronto, there's two ways that I could crop this. I can do so horizontally around here, or I can do so vertically. But cropping can be both simple and difficult. I can just use the marquee tool and select to where I want it to be and then just crop. But then you're going to get a photo that you cannot use for printing because you have not done so in a print ratio. Let's talk about image ratios or print ratios or camera ratios for just a second here. Now, both APS-C, which is a digital format of sensor, and it's a smaller size sensor, and full frame, which is the same as a 35mm film camera, the same as the gate for the film, or the frame of film that you're shooting in a film camera, you would find that in a digital camera today. So that's 36 by 24 millimeters. APS-C is roughly 24 by 18, but both of them are in a 3:2 ratio. That is why when you go to a photo finishing location, like a photo lab, and you ask them to print in 4:6, that's the reason why 4:6 exists. That is a 3:2 image size. Then from there you've got 8:12, 12:18, 18:24, and 30:20 or 20:30, depending on the orientation of your image. That's how that goes. Ideally, you want to keep your image in a 3:2 ratio. So what I would truly realistically recommend is that you actually create a transparent image in one of those sizes. And it's literally as simple as that. So let's say that the height is going to be, we'll try the height first. I'm really not sure what this is going to look like. Let's bump our PPI, our pixels per inch, up to 600. We can always bring that down afterwards. So we've got that image there. We're going to take our image here. I'm going to use the marquee tool, which I've got selected on my toolbar here. I'm going to leave that on normal because you can set that to fixed ratios and sizes. There's really no point doing that. And there are other ways of doing this cropping. There are 100 different ways. If you meet 100 photographers, there'll be 100 different ways of doing it. Maybe 600 was a bit high. But anyway, I've got too much building at the top there. I really want that to stop just around there. I really want to kind of like that there. I extend that up a bit more and leave it there. That almost kind of looks like a Fred Herzog photo at that point, and that's kind of where I'd leave it. I like having that edge of the door frame in. It gives it this really nice look as though we are a fly on the wall. And because I was shooting at a really low shutter speed, you can see that motion blur on the guy spinning his cowboy hat there. Stetson, I guess. And then there we go. That's where I would realistically leave that. So essentially what I've done there is I have used my transparent window as the cropping tool. How I got there as well, just so you know, is I went to Free Transform, which is under Edit, and then I can pull this around. I'm going to use Shift, and I'm going to hold left click, and I can drag that corner. I'm going to do it by the corners because I want to keep the aspect ratio solid. So that is a better crop, in my opinion. I could have gone horizontal with that as well. I might have missed out the, what are they called, canopies on the buildings there. And that would have been a bit of a shame, I find. But there we go. So I've now got a really high PPI image that I can send off to be printed. And that is a nice, quite controlled image, I find. And then if I wanted to export this as a JPEG, I would go to Layer, Flatten Image, which turns it back into a JPEG. And I can just go Save As and send that out. I would always recommend as well to any photographer who is learning and is looking at getting quite serious at this, most photo finishing places today are going to be looking at JPEG, printing from JPEG, maybe PNG. Some photo finishing labs will allow you to send in TIFFs, and that's fine, you can send in TIFFs. But I would recommend leaving your JPEG settings for your photographs for print at the highest possible setting, which in Photoshop is 12, and leave it there. Like if you're really worried about storage and storage size and file size, I would invest in an SSD, an external SSD, a solid state drive, and begin to save down from there. All right, so before I continue any further, do we have any questions right now? All right. So another thing we'll look at, of course, is going to be color correction. So I've got an image on film here. This was a film scan originally. And so we are going to look at color correcting this a little bit. The colors are almost there already. This was shot on, what was this? Respooled Kodak Aero Color 4, not to be confused with Aerochrome, which is an infrared color film. But this is actually a aerial surveillance film, or was originally supposed to be an aerial surveillance film. As drones came in, rather than aerial surveillance like U-2 planes or whatever they're called, with the, they can go up super high, like 50,000 feet, 70,000 feet, whatever. And they have those huge lenses in them. They were shooting down to this aerial surveillance film. And the color is really nice as a result. The resolution is huge as a result. And all of this, however, it can skew towards red quite often. And as you can see in the crops here, these are crops dying after harvest, because this was in November, very early November, just before the snow falls. And I could look at removing some of that red. The way that I would personally do this is through curves. So I'm going to go to Image, I'm going to go to Adjustment and Curves. And so I can either leave it in RGB here, which will do the whole color and light gamut all at once, or I can turn it into just the color gamut by selecting either red, green, or blue. So by the way, when you shoot photographs, both on film and digitally, you are always shooting in RGB. You will hear people talk about RGB versus CMYK. For photography, that is not really a thing. Everything is in RGB. I would also recommend, before you really jump into this with photo editing, that you should really look at having a calibrated monitor. And that's not something special. You can take your existing computer monitor or laptop monitor, go into your Windows or Mac settings and find the calibration settings, and try and get the colors and the light. There'll be light textures and gray textures and white textures, color textures, all of those things. And you have to calibrate them until they look correct. And that is something I really recommend doing, because then you are color correcting and dodging and burning accurately for your photo. So I can see that there's a whole bunch of red here. What I get when I turn onto the red channel is I get a histograph here, and that shows me where the red is. And I really want to tackle this line that runs through the middle based on the peaks here. I don't want to hit it on the troughs too much, because I can pull some red back in if I need to in this trough. But really I can see that this peak is going off the map, and I need to control that. So I'm just going to hover until I get the crosshair over that line in about the same space as that peak. Left click and hold, and I can begin to draw that out. And as you can see, that's becoming more green now. Let's pull this area of red back up, just a little touch. And there we go. I've pulled out most of that red now, and that crop is beginning to look a golden color, but there's a bit too much green in it now. And now I'm going to do the same thing here. So I'm going to aim on this end. Bring the green back up here. Not too much. So that's already beginning to look better. A little bit too much blue here. So this is a tough image to control, but there we go. You can see that I've kind of taken out quite a bit of the red there. So that's now beginning to look more golden. The white on this sign is beginning to look more white and less red now. And the white on the car here. There is another way that I can do this, but it will affect your whole light gamut too and can make the image darker. And that is by these pipettes, these 3 pipettes at the bottom. So I've got the white point pipette, grey point pipette, and black point pipette. The way that RGB can be white balanced, and white balance is not quite my friend, being somebody who was trained in a degree in film and TV production, it is the bane of my existence, but I learned to somewhat master it. You will never be a full master of it, but there we go. The way that white balance is controlled is through something known as even grey. In RGB at least. I believe it's slightly different in CMYK for print, but you wouldn't really want to mess around with that too much. You would want to have anything you've created in RGB and converted to CMYK already fairly close on its white balance. So what does even grey mean? It means that the white is going to represent a part of the image that is far too bright and far too hot. So in other words, the brightest light is going to be white because that is what the common essence of all colours is white. So in other words, too hot is white. The absence of all light will be black. And in the middle of that will be the most even grey you could imagine. And if you select all 3 points, then you're going to get a pretty good white balance there. We can try and take a look at that, but I think it's going to play around with the image a bit too much. I'm also going to have to start zooming in here. I'm going to pick on the car. See if I can find, yeah, that looks white, but I can see some red coming off of that. Probably the reflection in the lights there, that might be white enough. So we'll take a look in curves again. Okay, so we're fairly close because so all I do is I click on that, left click, to select that, and then just hover over the area I want, left click. And the colours stayed fairly the same when I did that. Let's try black. I think the wheel arch is there. I'm not sure if that's black or a very, very dark red. We'll try it. Okay, again, fairly close already on the colour correction I did with the curves. So that is kind of showing me I don't think I can find a grey here that I really want to risk. So let's try zooming out, and you can zoom out instantly to see the whole image by holding Control and pressing 0. And that brings us back out. So yeah, we were already fairly close, and we still at least get the colour of the actual film base in there. So we still get the effects of the film we were using, but now we've made that sign that was pretty pink from being fairly red before, now is white, as it is supposed to be. That's what it looked like in person. And the car that was white, that has rusted away and has turned cream, looks cream. So that's pretty good. The crops that were fairly red anyway are looking a little bit golden, and that's the effect we want. I can really play around with my color correction and just draw out all the red and try and pump up some greens in certain areas where the troughs were in the greens to kind of make this look more golden. But I kind of like the truth of an image. I don't like to fabricate it. I know that this would look really nice gold, but it did look kind of red because it was all sun bleached when we were there. So there we go. That is pretty much what I wanted to show to you today. Just a quick summarization of dodging and burning, of cropping, and of color correction. So this is the effect that we had on the dodging and burning, and I think that we did a pretty good job there. You are welcome to disagree, however. This is what we did with color correction, and this is what we did with cropping. If you missed any of the stages, any of the steps, when this tutorial or workshop, whatever you want to call it, finishes, just give it about 10 minutes, refresh the page or the Facebook app or however you're watching tonight. Come back and you'll be able to see those stages. over again. But other than that, please check out the links in the description of tonight's live video. And if you're a fan of Gambette, please consider getting your tickets for this year's show, which is July 5th and 6th. And the ticket link is in the description of tonight's video as well. So yeah, thank you for joining me. If you enjoyed what I've done tonight, take a look at the links in the description of tonight's video. Again, you'll see that video link for Roger Lowe, where you can see the history of what it meant to do dodging and burning in the darkroom, and the history of what it means to be one of those pros that worked in the darkroom under an enlarger. You'll also find a link to my print shop, where if you are interested in buying some of my photography for your walls, you can do so. However, if you are coming to Gambette this year and you're a Saskatoonian, stop in at the show, get your tickets, stop in at the show, and you'll be able to buy exclusive enlargements, framed prints, and possibly even canvas gallery wraps from me as well. And there'll also be fridge magnet prints too. But if you do live further afield, then do check out that print shop. And again, please do consider getting your tickets for Gambette Con 2025, and you can find that ticket link in the video. Thank you for joining me tonight, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.